Hi, I'm Mark Kelly and welcome to the show. Well, when Hosni Mubarak was finally forced from office after 18 days of protests, we saw an explosion of jubilation. We saw images of countless Egyptians in the streets celebrating a new future. What we didn't see was the sexual assault of CBS chief foreign correspondent Lara Logan. Today, she was finally released after spending days in a U.S. hospital and received a call of support from the U.S. president.
These people are not interested in compromise. They want Hosni Mubarak to step down.
Logan is a longtime war correspondent and was covering the celebration for CBS's 60 Minutes when she was surrounded by a frenzied mob, separated from her crew, and brutally beaten and raped. It was a group of Egyptian women and soldiers that eventually rescued her. Now, that incident is alerting the world to a problem women in Egypt know all too well. In a recent survey, 83% of women in that country said they'd been sexually harassed, a reality in stark contrast with what the world saw during Tahrir Square protests, where women who had never spent the night outside their home, camping out among men in the public square, women playing a central role without fear. Meet Asma Mahfouz. Her appeals online were credited with sparking the protests in Tahrir Square, protests where women marched publicly in great numbers. Now, it wasn't the first time, of course. In the 1919 revolution, masses of women demonstrated in Cairo against British colonialism. Since the 1950s, women have gradually entered the workforce in Egypt. They've become educated in even greater numbers. In the 1970s and 80s, advancing the cause of women became a pet cause of Egypt's First Lady, Jahan Sadat.
I believe a woman, if she is secured, the whole family will be secured.
But the truth is, women aren't secure. Until 1999, rapists could escape punishment by marrying their victims. The first conviction for sexual harassment wasn't until 2008. So will a revolution for Egypt's women take more than 3 weeks in Tahrir Square? Well, Mona Eltahawy is an Egyptian-born columnist and widely published commentator on Middle East affairs. Since the uprising began, she's helped us make sense of the events in Egypt. So we turn to her again tonight from New York. Mona, nice to see you again.
Hi, Mark.
Well, what do you make of this? I mean, you and I were talking about this even last week when we were commenting on the fact of, you were pointing out men and women standing shoulder to shoulder and how this was really such a change for the role of women in Egypt. Then this Lara Logan story comes out. What do you make of this?
Well, first of all, Mark, I'd like to unequivocally condemn the beating and sexual assault of Lara Logan. There is nothing at all that could ever justify a brutal attack, and I wish her a speedy recovery. I wish her and her family the best. Every Egyptian I know is disgusted and very saddened by the attack. I think the best way to help Lara Logan is to leave her alone, and the best way that we can get something constructive out of this is to use this tragic event to highlight, as we're doing tonight, violence against women in Egypt and women's rights generally. No one I know in Tahrir Square was ever under the illusion that after those wonderful 18 days that everything in Egypt has changed. The revolution is meant to overthrow many things, top of which was Hosni Mubarak, and he's gone now, thank God. So I think this is a good time to step forward and say, what can we do to make Egypt better and take that Tahrir spirit onto the streets of Cairo? Because I just had dinner tonight with an Egyptian friend of mine who spent the entire period sleeping outside in Tahrir Square. And she told me that was the safest part of Cairo. I myself and many women I know, many Egyptian women and non-Egyptian women, have unfortunately been groped and faced various kinds of street sexual harassment. What's been happening in Egypt over the past few years is this gradual shrinking of public space that unfortunately women have ended up paying the biggest price for. So I hope as the revolution continues, this space increases and women are out there at the forefront, as they were in Tahrir, fighting for the right to speak out against sexual harassment, as well as making sexual harassment something that everybody pays attention to.
You mentioned about Egyptian women and foreigners as well, and there was this study from the Center for Women's Rights in Cairo. This is from 2008. Suggests 83% of Egyptian women, 98% of foreign women have faced sexual harassment in that country. I guess this incident, and I don't want to overplay this incident, this is one incident, but it is sort of shining a light on a side that maybe you were familiar with, but a lot of outsiders weren't. And I wonder are we being unreal unrealistic with our expectations if we think that 18 days in Tahrir Square is going to change all of that?
There's a lot of work to do, Mark. That survey, unfortunately, it took a long time to get a survey like that published because no one was speaking out against, no one wanted to hear women speak out against sexual harassment because women were always shamed into silence. And I think one of the best things that happened in Tahrir was that both men and women found their voice. And those women I know because I have activist friends on the ground in Egypt who defied their families to spend the night outside in Tahrir. They're working every day with feminist collectives and in feminist groups determined to get women's voice as Egypt rewrites its constitution, as Egypt pushes for a civilian government. So I think what's really important to understand, and again, the best way to help Lara Logan and to put this in context and move ahead, is that yes, women have faced tremendous discrimination in Egypt. And this is a great chance now to fight against that. And not just that, you know, as a journalist and many journalist friends I know in Egypt, were specifically targeted by the Hosni Mubarak regime. I was covering a court case once in Egypt and a riot police officer groped my breast. I know many other Egyptian women journalists and activists who faced even worse sexual harassment than I did. So this was something that we got in Egypt from the police and that we got from other men. And I think what Tahrir is helping is that by allowing this kind of almost utopian society to exist within Tahrir, that spirit is now being taken outside and people are being realistic. No one is under the illusion that in 18 days we fixed everything. But we also want the world to understand that that tragic incident should not be taken to color all of Egypt because there are good and bad everywhere. Obviously, I don't need to say this. And Egyptian women and soldiers rescued Lara. So I'm hoping that to be constructive about this, we say that we need to fight for women's rights in Egypt as we do everywhere. And this is a great chance to focus on those issues and to speak out clearly and say, this is wrong anywhere.
Well, let me just get you on this idea of expectations, though, because it's interesting when we see, I mean, clearly there were, this is one issue. People were hoping this would improve the situation of gender rights. But there are also now people who are going on strike saying we want better wages. There are people saying, we want, better democracy. We want a cleaner environment. All of this is coming out of Egypt right now. So I'm wondering if there are some expectations that simply can't be met because revolutions take time.
They definitely take time, but I think what is so encouraging that's happening in Egypt now is this kind of rebirth of the country. It's very important to know that this isn't Egypt kind of finding democracy or finding freedom. It's basically Egypt reaffirming and reclaiming what it used to have until the 1952 coup, when a series of military men basically destroyed the country. Because despite being under the monarchy and despite being under British occupation and the huge injustices, especially when it came to social justice and poverty issues, Egypt at the turn of the last century was a much more vibrant, politically, socially, and cultural country than we see today. So I think what Egyptians are doing is everyone is speaking out. Everyone has rediscovered their voice, and they're saying, this is what we want. Because during those 18 days, we remembered what has been in our political collective memory. And what Hosni Mubarak did, and he was the fourth president we had since 1952 from the military, was that he managed to squeeze and suffocate everything out of the country. So women's issues that Christians have faced under the Mubarak regime, where, their churches were attacked, they weren't even allowed to build churches freely. So religious rights, women's rights, workers' rights, all of that is coming out into the fore now because people have rediscovered their voice. It's an exciting time, but no one is being unrealistic. They're saying we have a long way to go, but it's important to just expressing it is a good first step.
Mona, always good to get your insight on these issues. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.